My name is Batento Batts, and I'm the Dean of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm thrilled to be with you tonight at our second CronkiteLIVE event of the semester. Tonight is a special edition of CronkiteLIVE as we have partnered with 12 News to bring you a multidimensional investigative story turned podcast series. But before we start our program, I want to thank Cronkite Endowment Board member and 12 News President and General Manager Kate Morris for bringing this fantastic event and experience to Cronkite. Thank you, Kate. Kate is a proud Cronkite alum, and she embodies our leadership, integrity, and journalism values every day. Thank you, Kate, for your continued support and engagement of the Cronkite School. Now, on behalf of the 12 News I-Team, I would like to formally introduce you to the official screening and panel discussion on Locked Inside. Locked Inside follows the harrowing and heartbreaking story of Christopher Lambeth and those who crossed his path along the way. The documentary digs into a subject that unfortunately does not get careful, in-depth attention in the mainstream. We're talking about mental health and care for those who need help. We will watch the documentary together and then be greeted by a robust panel of experts and industry leaders ready to answer your questions after the documentary. Thank you very much for coming this evening, and please put your hands together for longtime 12 News anchor and staple in our Phoenix community, Mark Curtis.
Dean, thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for being here, both our audience here and our virtual audience watching online. After the screening of Locked Inside, as Dean mentioned, we will be taking questions for our panelists here, both questions from our virtual audience and questions from all of you, because I happen to know that you're graded if you ask a question, if you're a Cronkite student. So we expect a lot of questions. Our job as journalists, and for all of you Cronkite students, your job as future journalists is to be a seeker of the truth, a truth teller. Absolutely, and it's something that we work hard at every day at 12 News, good storytelling is vitally important. But exposing wrongdoing, keeping our community safe, listening and taking action when a problem is brought to our attention, being a voice for the voiceless. Those are the tenets of good journalism, of any good news organization. When a tragedy like the one exposed by Erica and Katie and our I-Team happens, and in digging into it, we then find the things like negligence, staffing issues, and a history of problems, it's our job, it's our responsibility to bring it into the light in the hopes that we can bring about change and that other families won't have to endure the pain and the loss the family in our series had to endure. You'll meet our panelists and we'll take your questions right after the screening, but first, this is Locked Inside.
April 12th, 2021, 5 hours, 29 minutes, 11 seconds.
Sir, we have a bad connection. Where are you at? 3583 East Wild Horse?
Yes. One of our clients just grew and attacked the staff.
Okay, what's going on there?
This man calling 911 is frantic.
Okay, what? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding you. What did he do?
So frantic that at first it's hard to hear what's going on.
I said one of our clients just attacked us.
Okay.
It's a group home.
It's an employee at a group home calling for help after he said one of the residents was trying to attack him and his coworker.
Hello?
Okay, does anybody need medical attention?
They ran outside the house, that resident still inside, when the operator sent a squad car.
Okay, yes, we have officers on the way right now. Does anybody need medical? Do you need the paramedics to come out and check on you?
No, not yet. We're outside running. Just the police.
You just need the police? Okay.
But once those officers got there, they'd realize how wrong that employee was. That this call for help was far worse than anyone could have imagined, and that the suspect had a big secret.
Definitely didn't think that I was living next to a murderer.
It's terrifying. We have kids all up and down this street.
They should be shutting that home down, in my opinion.
This is Locked Inside, a closer look at a tragedy that should have been prevented.
I hated it.
We don't know who's there, why they're there.
Exposing gaps in a system that should protect the state's most vulnerable people and secure the state's most violent offenders. But what happens if they're one and the same?
I think this is a system that let both of them down.
Silence and a lack of transparency only tell me that maybe there's more to the story that we don't know.
The thing that I always remember is his smile.
Nicole Williams can easily remember her first love.
Infectious, and not just his mouth. I mean, his whole face and eyes would light up.
Stephen Howells. She met him on a bus in Hawaii in 1993 and married him 5 months later.
We were young, and so there was always financial struggle, especially in Hawaii where it's so expensive to live.
She said Stephen was a music man, playing his saxophone, trying his hand at sound engineering, with big dreams on the horizon.
You know, he never had the goal of being the front man leading the act, but he loved being behind the scenes and doing the music mixing and recording and helping from the back end, being able to put music out.
But about a year into their marriage, Nicole started noticing a shift.
At first it was small things. And he would make little comments that were just a little off. They started progressing more. We had a park that we would walk by, and he started talking to me about a frog he met there and the conversations he was having with this frog. But it took me a little bit to realize that it wasn't just him talking. He was hearing the frog talk to him.
Signs of delusions were starting to show.
That was one of the first ones that really stood out. And it started affecting his work.
She saw him get worse over time. Trying to get by day was a challenge, and help was hard to come by.
And watching him struggle with medications and start getting a little better, and then those wouldn't work, and kind of the yo-yoing up and down.
The yo-yoing became too much for both of them. They divorced in 1994.
Was his mental health one of the reasons that led to the split?
That was the reason for the split.
Stephen eventually moved to Arizona, where he had family. Nicole said he'd try staying in places like group homes with supported living.
And he always had the greatest sense of humor on it too. I have one card that said, from all of us, you know, we miss you, and had like a little apartment building, and he added in my head, you know, and so he did have a humor about it.
He eventually stopped the connection, and Nicole lost track of Stephen, but she always tried to figure out where he was, even searching shelters in their home state.
I would check the Social Security death index once a year to see if he showed up. I would walk through a lot of the homeless shelters, making sure he's okay. That was the main thing. We wanted to know he was okay.
She later learned he wouldn't be okay.
You guys the one that called?
Around 5:30 in the morning on April 12, 2021, Gilbert police responded to that frantic 911 call at a Tilda Manor group home on Wild Horse Drive that's supposed to provide 24/7 supervision to its residents.
Okay. And how did he attack you?
Like they told the 911 operator, These employees tried to explain that a resident inside the home tried to hurt them, and they ran outside.
Alright, so we'll go and talk to him real quick.
But when officers tried to go find that resident,
You guys have a key? It's locked.
the door was locked, and neither employee had a key.
So you guys are the staff? Yeah. Okay, so how are you guys gonna get in the house when we leave?
Then, 6 minutes after the officers arrived,
So you guys left the house without any keys?
everything changed.
Also, there's a man inside bleeding from his head.
They saw a man lying in a pool of blood on a bedroom floor, and they rushed to get inside. They eventually made it in,
We've made entry.
and the footage goes dark.
Alright, check for pulse.
They render what sound like chest compressions and called for backup to come in and help this man.
Do you have a pulse?
No.
Soon after, they find another man in the shower, and the footage comes back on, still blurry due to police redaction.
What's your name, sir? Chris. Chris? Is that short for Christopher? Yeah.
Christopher Lambeth, the man who reportedly tried to attack the staff members. Police suspect he might have hurt the other man too, and took him into custody.
One detained.
By the time backup got to the man lying in blood on the floor, it was too late.
And just so you know, you do have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court of law.
The chest compressions didn't work.
Alright, boss, go and have a seat.
49-year-old Stephen Howells was declared dead at 5:46 a.m.
That should have never happened. I worried about things like that happening, but I worried about it on the street, not in someplace that's supposed to keep them safe.
The Gilbert police report details that Christopher Lambeth allegedly tried to attack the two employees around 5 a.m. They ran outside, and he ultimately locked them out of the house. Lambeth admitted on the scene that he was the one who killed Stephen Howells.
Mr. Lambeth, you're here on a new Superior Court case for one count of murder in the second degree, a Class 1 felony.
Christopher Lambeth was booked into county jail and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Stephen Howells.
Sir, you have a bond in the amount of $2 million. That is a secured bond, so you could use a bonding agency to assist you.
This was not how his day was supposed to go, sitting in a jail cell charged with murder.
Thank you, sir.
April 12th should have been moving day for Christopher Lambeth. He was scheduled to move out of Tilda Manor to a lower level of care at 11 a.m. the morning of the killing. But as it turns out, April 12th stands out for another reason.
It was a tragic thing that had to happen to them.
Are they alive or dead right now?
They're dead.
Exactly 16 years before the killing at the Tilda Manor group home, on April 12, 2005, Christopher Lambeth found himself in a different jail.
Okay, how do you know they're dead?
I killed them.
Accused of a different brutal murder. The Pima County Sheriff's Department burned the original tapes from this interview, so this is a reenactment based on a transcript.
You killed him?
Yeah.
This was 20-year-old Christopher Lambeth talking with detectives. They brought him in for questioning after finding longtime couple Carl and Patricia Gremler brutally stabbed to death inside their home in Rojito, a small community outside of Tucson.
They were real good people. They helped the whole community.
Juanita Carbajal, born and raised in Rojito, lived next door to the Gremlers and remembers the grisly scene from 2005.
Just like family. We grew up as family. It was a tragic thing that had to happen to them.
Back then, a family friend got a bad feeling when the Gremlers didn't show up for church and called the sheriff's office to check on them on April 12, 2005. When deputies first stepped into the Gremlers' home, they found a mess and braced themselves as they walked further inside, ultimately finding Christopher Lambeth in a bed watching TV. Across the hall, they found Carl and Patricia's bloody bodies.
It was like a scary story.
But Christopher Lambeth wasn't an intruder in their home. Christopher Lambeth was Carl and Patricia Gremler's grandson.
You can tell me, man, you know, are you glad they're gone?
Yeah. I'm happy that they're dead now.
Why is that?
It really is a lot of personal problems, and I'm just glad it's over with them.
Court records show Lambeth was diagnosed with bipolar and schizoaffective disorders when he was a teen. and had been living with his grandparents after receiving treatment from different mental health facilities.
He would come up and down this little path right here, breaking bottles. He would get rocks and just break him. And I wasn't going to tell him anything because I already knew that he had problems.
Some friends reported that the Gremlers were afraid of their grandson, but didn't want to turn him away.
They try to do everything for him. You know, they say sometimes grandparents' love can accomplish a lot, but not with him.
So you didn't see it as them trying to help you, you saw it as them...
No, it wasn't helpful at all. It was destructive to me.
Detectives pressed Christopher Lambeth on why he did this. He never provided an exact reason, but did tell detectives he stopped taking his medicine before he killed them.
Do you think you did this because you were off your medication?
No.
In 2007, Christopher Lambeth pleaded guilty except insane to the double murder of his grandparents. As part of that plea, he was sentenced 25 to life at the Arizona State Hospital.
We felt that he got a fair sentence because he had mental problems. They put him in a place where he was going to get help. That's where he should have been.
But after just 9 years, he'd be back living in the community.
He should have never been released.
When Lambeth was sentenced to the state hospital, he was put under the watch of the state's Psychiatric Security Review Board, or PSRB. This state board is responsible for keeping track of people deemed guilty except insane and deciding if those people are well enough to get out of the state hospital before their sentence is up.
Certainly, every time anyone makes a decision and can't predict the future, you can question, did I make the right decision?
Dr. Carol Olson is currently the head of the psychiatry department at Valleywise Health. She also used to be the chair of the PSRB.
I think that the board tends to be conservative and is supposed to keep community safety paramount.
So why release Christopher Lambeth early? Audio from a 2017 board meeting detailed his apparent progress.
His progress has just been phenomenal. He has complied with everything. He is doing things that normal, healthy adults do. He's gotten a job on his own. He's got himself on a sports team. He cooks his own meals. He does his own laundry. I mean, he takes care of himself completely.
This voice is Christopher Lambeth's sister, who declined to talk with us in our reporting.
So I think at this point, it would be extremely beneficial for him to start gaining those other independent skills that he can start doing them on his own so he knows how to do them and so that he can survive as a functioning adult.
She wasn't the only one praising him.
Hypothetically, I could go to a baseball game or have lunch with him or something like that. So I'm very proud of his improvement.
His attorney also marveled at his progress, and the board ultimately approved Christopher Lambeth for less supervision, with a reminder that should have been taken seriously.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Stay well. Take your medicine.
I will.
The exact date isn't clear, but by sometime in 2018, Christopher Lambeth was living at Tilda Manor. Even though he was living in the community, he still had to go before the board for check-ins. The last board check-in before he allegedly killed Stephen Howells was in August 2020.
Let's say the person ends up doing something before anybody is aware that they're deteriorating or not doing well. It sits poorly, obviously, because nobody wants to feel that they were responsible for releasing someone to the community who later does something to harm themselves or others.
Dr. Olson couldn't comment on Christopher Lambeth's case specifically. She resigned from the board several years before the group home killing.
I think it is important to know that many times people are out in the community for years before something like that happens, and it is difficult to predict with 100% certainty how somebody is going to behave for years on end.
A 2018 state audit, before Stephen Howells died, found the board was making decisions with inconsistent data, a problem the board claimed it fixed. But critics aren't so sure.
Good work.
The PSRB declined to comment on Christopher Lambeth's case after he was arrested for killing again.
That's 3 lives already, or who knows how many more.
Imagine a rental house that's never been really taken care of. And you have loads of people living there that don't take care of anything. That's what the inside of this house looked like.
When Lisa Lomelli first walked inside this house she's describing, she couldn't believe her eyes.
Everything was worn, everything was old, stained, dirty.
Not a very good rating, especially for a place her son was calling home.
And plus, you know, you've got people with anger issues and there's holes and this and that. So you don't want to put a ton of money into it, but it was, you know, just the bare bones.
Lisa's son was living at the Tilda Manor group home on Wild Horse Drive in Gilbert. Lisa said he was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and bipolar disorder, and he was court-ordered to live at the home after he tried to hurt his family.
He hated it. I hated it.
But her son did make a friend on the inside.
When I would go visit, I always visited Chris and my son.
Chris, as in Christopher Lambeth.
I spent a lot of time with him, and never in my wildest dreams would I would never cross my mind he'd be the last person that I would have thought would have done something like that.
Were you aware of his background at all?
No. And that is something that bothers me a lot.
Lisa and her son had no idea Christopher Lambeth was a convicted double murderer after brutally killing his grandparents more than a decade before.
I wish somebody had given me the option to choose whether introduce this person, you know, into my life, to my kids and whatnot.
She'd often visit with her son and Chris, bring them around her other kids.
I needed to know, look, this person has a history of violent behavior. They didn't have to tell me what it was. They didn't have to, you know, but then I could have made the choice myself.
Lisa wasn't the only one taken by surprise. None of the neighbors we talked to knew a convicted murderer lived down the street.
And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I mean, you know, we have kids all up and down this street.
Neighbor Chris Lineberry is a dad and school administrator who instantly started voicing his concerns after Stephen Howells was killed.
I think about people who are more vulnerable, and obviously some of the other individuals who live in this home are vulnerable, and what was in place to keep them safe. You know, my issue is not with the residents, it's with the way that this home was run. And the fact that this happened and nobody in the neighborhood knew that there was somebody with that kind of record living there.
He took his concerns all the way to Gilbert's town council.
I have children in my neighborhood who are afraid to go to sleep at night now.
But it turns out there wasn't much the town could do, as it's a state-licensed facility.
We do not license the group homes, so it's very difficult for me to say that I can pull somebody's license when it's not in my control.
Gilbert Mayor Bridget Peterson was one of the first to call for the home to be shut down.
I would like to see this home closed down. I think that when you have an issue to this extent in a recovery residence like this, that there should be no question that it should shut down.
Especially knowing it takes a toll on the town's resources.
We have over 80 group homes in Gilbert, and so my police department unfortunately comes to know some of them very well. This happens to be one of the ones that is in our top 10 of visits from our police department.
Tilda Manor had 5 locations, 3 in Gilbert and 2 in nearby Mesa. According to Gilbert police records, the Tilda Manor on Wild Horse Drive had 91 police calls from the beginning of 2017 to September 2021, putting it at number 8 in the top 10. Another Tilda Manor location in Gilbert ranked even higher, with 110 calls over the 4-year period.
Anytime the PD is spending time at a home like this, a recovery residence, they're not able to be out on the streets for other things that are going on in our community. And it's just an unfortunate situation that we have bad actors in some of these businesses.
Here in Mesa, it's a similar story. Over the past 2.5 years, officers were called to the 2 Tilda Manor group homes a combined 176 times. Some of those calls were dismissed, but others turned into investigations. The majority of calls are missing persons cases. Others show cases of violence. One resident arrested for attacking another, and another case where a resident punched a staff member in the face. Once, a resident was rushed to the hospital after trying to kill himself with a razor given to him by a staff member.
It doesn't seem like a very safe environment. It's unacceptable. And the purpose, my understanding of the purpose of homes like this is to help people make different and better decisions.
Back in Gilbert, Police records show there were 2 calls for assault at the Wild Horse Drive home less than a month before Stephen Howells was killed. Neither involved Christopher Lambeth, who, by all accounts, was a model resident at Tilda Manor.
I want to go see him and say, hey, Chris, what happened? I mean, he calls me Mom. How did they let this happen is what I want to know. I want to know, how did they let this happen?
No one at Tilda Manor would talk with 12 News after Stephen Howells died, but we did learn that staff members are not allowed to touch residents, and if a situation got out of control, protocol was to call 911.
And then you don't have any skills in breaking up fights or talking somebody through a mental breakdown or somebody that's having a seizure, and all you can do is dial 911, your job's going to be so incredibly hard.
Not to mention, they're supposed to be providing supervision to residents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when you look at case after case involving missing residents, fights, attempts at self-harm, something doesn't add up.
That's a sign that there's something bigger happening there. And the residents who live there, obviously, many of them have issues, but they need help with those issues. You know, I understand nobody's perfect. I certainly am not. To have a place that's charged with the responsibility they are and have the lack of oversight that they apparently have is extremely disturbing. It's something I'd really like to see change.
A state investigation later found that those 2 employees working the morning of the killing did break a very big rule, and that wasn't the only problem going on inside that house. After calls, emails, and messages all went unanswered, we tracked down the owners of the group home Tilda Manor.
We're with Channel 12. We were hoping to ask you about Tilda Manor.
Samuel and Grace Ashu. Arizona business records list them as the ones in charge of all 5 Tilda Manor locations.
Would you speak to us, though, about the recent situation there on Monday?
Right now, I can't talk to our corporate lawyers.
We haven't gotten any information. We've left a few messages with you guys, but you haven't responded.
This was 3 days after that group home murder on April 12th, 2021.
Okay.
Sorry, no ma'am. Well,
Tilda Manor did, however, have to answer to the state health department, who went to investigate the day of the killing. And what they found would be a bombshell. 23 violations in all, from little things to glaring problems. At least 6 of the 9 residents living in the home, including Christopher Lambeth, were flagged to be a danger to self or danger to others, which should have been considered before they were placed at Tilda Manor. 7 out of 9 residents weren't screened properly and shouldn't have been admitted to the home.
It did result in a danger to our neighborhood. It resulted in a danger to the employees, and it obviously resulted in a danger to the residents because one of them was murdered, allegedly by another one of the residents there. And when you read that report, it's just damning.
There's more. The state found some of the residents weren't receiving proper counseling, including Lambeth, whose treatment plan wasn't even up to date. In the months leading up to the murder, Lambeth's behavior started to change. He expressed concerns about moving out, amid pressure from his treatment team. He skipped meals, stopped talking to other people in the home. Notes in Lambeth's file showed he would sometimes have hallucinations linked to dangerous commands and homicidal behavior, that he had signs of anxiety and depression, but there weren't any interventions, that he had a decrease in therapy sessions before allegedly killing Stephen Howells, that his medical records show one of his medications ran out and seemingly wasn't replenished for about a month.
I think you can judge a society a lot based on how we take care of people who aren't able to take care of themselves or who need extra assistance. To allow them to stay in business and allow them to continue to be neglectful and derelict in their duty, as the report says, is really a travesty.
The state found the 2 employees working the morning of Stephen Howells' death violated group home policy when they left a reportedly dangerous Christopher Lambeth inside the house, unsupervised, with 8 other residents. And after a review of Tilda Manor's rulebook, the state found some of the group home's own rules had been out of compliance with the state since 2013, despite several inspections since then.
How might it be possible for a violation to be missed during an inspection?
That's a great question.
This is Colby Bauer with Arizona's Department of Health Services.
If it's an annual inspection, our inspectors are going in there and they're looking generally at things. And so they may not see some violation with paperwork, for example. And so we may miss that one staff member doesn't have all the training they're supposed to have. That can't happen. So those inspections are really just a spot check.
Colby used to oversee licensing for the state health department, including group homes, but left his role in early 2022 after we shot this interview. He couldn't talk specifics about the murder case at Tilda Manor, but could weigh in generally about licensing. State surveyors are supposed to go out and inspect homes once a year, but that might not always happen, like if a facility is accredited. The only other time the state would show up to inspect a group home could be if there was a complaint.
Do you think the state should be doing more or could be doing more to ensure these facilities are safe?
We're out there every year. We're out there for every complaint. There is a limit to how often we can go out. We have to have reason under Arizona law to go into these facilities. And so the way that we do our inspections is all rooted in Arizona law.
Who do you think is responsible for ensuring people are safe in these homes?
Well, I mean, by Arizona law, it's the folks that actually run the homes. And, ultimately the licensees are responsible.
I think that group homes have a place in our community, and I think it comes down to them being operated well. And again, we have many in Gilbert that we don't have any issues with.
In the wake of the murder investigation, Gilbert Mayor Bridget Peterson changed their town policy, so police will have to report all calls to group homes to the health department, which, as of now, is not required by the state.
Where do you think things went wrong?
I think from the state level down, if there was a way to notify the Gilbert Police Department, but even if our police department knew, how would they have prevented this? It really comes down to the staff working in that home. Maybe that staff needs to be better educated, maybe they need to be better trained, maybe they need to be more staff in a home, but I think that there's probably something that should have been done along the way.
Lisa's son moved out of Tilda Manor before Stephen Howells was killed.
If you could go back in time and you had, any say in this decision, would you let your son live in that house?
No, absolutely not.
From Lisa's view, this home was set up to fail.
Why speak out?
Because I don't want this to happen to anybody else. That could have, I don't want to say easily been my son, but I know my son, and I know his issues, and I know his triggers and whatnot. And my son could have very easily had an issue like that. And I don't want anybody else having to go through this, whether it's they flip out and do something terrible, or whether something terrible gets done to them.
There are not a lot of places people with serious mental illnesses can go for help in Arizona. The state hospital and psychiatric units at other hospitals have a limited number of beds. Arizona's Medicaid program reported around 2,400 available psychiatric beds, which is up from years past. But the need rose too, and not everyone got a bed. Some people wind up in prison or jail. Others end up on the streets.
Arizona has very small number of long-term type of psychiatric hospital beds. So many of those people just end up getting continuously on a round of going in the hospital, getting out, often sent to a group home. They don't stay. Then they're off their medication, their symptoms get worse, then they get arrested for doing something, then they're back in the hospital again, and it's a continuous cycle.
A continuous cycle.
Right now, the way psychiatric hospitals are incentivized, they're all paid the same. It doesn't matter how complex the patient is. So if you have a more complex patient, either because they're highly violent or self-injurious or they have complex medical problems, psychiatric hospitals are incentivized not to take those patients. And so those patients often are poorly served and don't spend the time in the hospital that they need.
By now we know how Christopher Lambeth got to Tilda Manor, but we don't really know how Stephen Howells got there.
Did Stephen always want to get help?
It took a while for him to realize he needed it initially. But yeah, he wanted to get better. He wanted to have his life again.
Nicole and Stephen kept in touch for several years after they divorced, but Stephen eventually stopped responding.
So we were pretty sure he was either in Arizona or in Hawaii, but when you're in the hospital, when you're dealing with these things, you generally don't have Facebook, social media, phone number put in the phone book, ways to track people down like that.
We were able to piece some of his story together through court records, and it's a lot like that continuous cycle Dr. Olson mentioned. First, in 2015, he got a notice of eviction. In 2016, he got a ticket for trespassing in a Phoenix park. It's not clear why he was there or what happened immediately after that. But more than 2 years later, in 2018, court records show he was in the state hospital. His medical report indicated he had limited insight and impaired reality. A hospital staff person reported Stephen Howells was not a behavioral problem, that most of his issues are related to psychosis and delusional thoughts, like believing government officials were tracking him. The filing emphasized over and over that Stephen Howells needed serious help, and an advocate requested the county assign him a guardian to help with health decisions. But in January 2019, Stephen Howells was released from the state hospital to a group home. He was reportedly stable and sticking to a medication plan, but still had delusions. A few months later, the court denied his advocate's request for a guardian. Then, the paper trail goes cold again until November 2020.
Okay. State your name, please. Sir?
My name's Stephen Scott Howells now.
When Stephen Howells appeared before a judge for that 2016 trespassing ticket.
Ma'am, I don't have any memory of this happening, and I have found no evidence that I have signed it myself. There is no address that has been submitted to me of the location of this incident, so I find I must move that this be dismissed as a clerical error.
The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office said deputies responded to a call for service at a group home in Santan Valley and took Stephen Howells into custody when they realized he had an outstanding warrant for that trespassing ticket. A group home Howells told the judge he moved into just 3 days before.
They don't have business cards, and I didn't have it in my wallet. I'm sorry, ma'am. I was not prepared to be arrested. I was a plaintiff calling on the services of the police in Santan.
Okay.
And the sheriff's department arrested me. And there was nothing done about the defendants. Who were threatening me to the point of physical provocation.
Soon after all of this, the trespassing case was dismissed. This was 5 months before he was killed at Tilda Manor. As for when he moved there, a Tilda Manor staff member told police he'd been there about 4 months.
There needs to be systematic change, but I also think the more awareness there is, the more it's not just quiet and shunted to the side and people don't want to talk about it, the more we'll continue to see things happen.
Almost 3 months after the group home killing at Tilda Manor, Governor Doug Ducey signed a new law getting rid of the Psychiatric Security Review Board. Instead, all the guilty except insane cases will be managed by the state's court systems, meaning judges will decide whether or not someone should be released early. Certain lawmakers and advocates applauded the move, but Dr. Olson has her doubts.
And I wasn't sure that a judge in a busy criminal court would be able to take the time and have the background in mental health, as many of the board members do, to really make a considered decision about what should happen with that patient. I still feel I wish the PSRB would have received sufficient resources to be able to actually function as it was intended to function.
The change to courts isn't set to happen until July 2023. In the interim, the board is supposed to operate with newer, stricter guidelines. The new law did away with one position, so now there's only 4 people on the board. And in early 2022, we learned 2 more board members resigned. In February, March, and April of 2022, the board couldn't hold its monthly meeting because it didn't have enough people, meaning all people deemed guilty except insane who are due for check-ins are waiting in limbo until the governor's office appoints new members. And Dr. Olson brings up a good point. Only time will tell whether this change to the courts will make the state's mental health care system any better.
I personally feel that mentally ill people who committed a violent crime and were found guilty except insane need to have an enhanced type of monitoring beyond what occurs to to those who have not, for the safety of the community.
In July 2021, the State Health Department filed to revoke Tilda Manor's license at the Wild Horse Drive location, much to neighbors' relief.
It would be a victory for my family, it would be a victory for our neighborhood, and it would be a victory for the people who live in that home.
The health department told me that despite the investigation and the murder, Tilda Manor was still allowed to operate all 5 of its locations.
The wheels of justice turn at glacial speed, and this definitely didn't happen quickly.
Tilda Manor disputed the revocation and still hasn't resolved this matter with the state. So the company still has its license to operate the home on Wild Horse Drive. Another Tilda Manor in Mesa actually lost its license in October 2021 after a complaint that residents were left alone inside. All 5 of the locations seem empty now.
How did it happen? How was an agency given the freedom to house people who they weren't qualified to house? How was there that big of a gap or hole in the system that people were able to fall through? And these aren't cracks. These are wide gaps.
The state was able to find so many problems only after Stephen Howells was killed at Tilda Manor. Tilda Manor wouldn't tell us whether the 2 employees working that morning were ever reprimanded, or explain why they were operating without following some of the rules.
And my issue is not with the individuals who live in that home. How in the world, putting people in a place where they're not, where there's nobody that's trained to deal with them, are you doing no harm?
As of now, Christopher Lambeth is the only one charged in this case. Christopher Lambeth, who was living in a state-licensed group home, found to have flaws in its function. A group home where broken rules were seemingly allowed to slide for years, despite regular state inspections. Christopher Lambeth, who is under the jurisdiction of a state board, criticized for making decisions with inconsistent data. Christopher Lambeth, who years ago killed his grandparents and was found guilty except insane, indicating he didn't know what he was doing was wrong.
I will say personally, I forgive and I have nothing against Christopher Lambeth. He is sick. I think this is the system that let both of them down.
In October 2021, Stephen Howells' family, not including Nicole, filed a lawsuit against Tilda Manor and the state of Arizona, blaming the group home, the state health department, and the PSRB for Stephen Howells' death and failing to properly care for suspect Christopher Lambeth. In court filings, Tilda Manor denied any wrongdoing and pointed the blame at Christopher Lambeth, the state health department, and other agencies involved. The state couldn't comment on pending litigation.
You know, we may have divorced, but he's still my family to me. He's still somebody that has a very important part of my heart.
Christopher Lambeth is scheduled to go to trial on the murder charge for killing Stephen Howells later this spring. He pleaded not guilty in that case. He also picked up another charge while in custody: aggravated assault for allegedly attacking another inmate, breaking his nose, and causing trauma to the other inmate's face. The same kind of violence that allegedly killed Stephen Howells at Tilda Manor, the group home that was only supposed to help both of them.
Given his condition, we knew that he would never be okay and back to normal functioning. But there are so many people who fall through the cracks with mental health that our main thing was wanting to make sure that he wasn't falling through those cracks. He was getting the help he needed. He was someplace safe, which unfortunately he wasn't.
After all these years, Nicole held on to the cards and letters from Stephen, his words sharing love and humor preserved with care as he fell through the cracks.
To Tilda Manor, that one location. A man dead, another man in limbo. And the questions that arise as you watch that, and I'm going to encourage all of you, both here and who are watching online, to please give us your questions, because I think we're sitting on something that is absolutely vital, not only in Phoenix and in Arizona, but across the country. And that is the question of our mental health system. Are we failing these people? Did the system, as someone said in Erica's story, let them both down, both Stephen and Christopher? And what happens at the intersection of our mental health system, our healthcare system, and the criminal justice system? Just some of the questions that I think Erica and Katie, who you're about to meet, bring up in that tremendous piece of journalism, textbook investigative journalism. I'm so proud of the work they do, not just because I work with them, but just as someone who lives here and understands the importance of addressing this issue. When you look at a home in a residential neighborhood where the neighbors didn't understand that there was a killer living in that home. So let's introduce you to our team, starting at the very end with Katie Wilcox, who is the 12 News I-Team executive producer. And Katie, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. So I work with Erica and our team of reporters at 12 News. I lead our investigative unit, but also handle a lot of the day-to-day and kind of train many reporters and producers on some of these investigative methods. So going back and watching this, I think we look at data, we look at a lot of documents, reviewed tons of video, obviously audio, chasing records. This clearly took a while to produce, and I think it shows a good example of what it takes, and if you're continuing to do the journalism over and over and over, day after day, and airing many, many stories, and eventually a documentary like this that exposes so many things.
It really does. Erica Stapleton, the fantastic reporter in that series and who continually does great work at 12 on the I-Team. Erica, why don't you tell the folks about your background and what you do?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone else for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to see such a good group of people here. And as Mark said, I do a lot of reporting at 12 News. A lot of it is focused on crime. And when I first started reporting on this story, there was really something that I just couldn't shake. There was always another stone to unturn. There was always another person or another agency involved. And I think as we continued to dig and dig and dig, we only came up with more questions. So that's really what resulted in this piece right here, is that doing a simple day turn or one story wasn't enough, and we had to continue chronicling everything that we'd been learning and everything that we'd been uncovering. And when you're able to put something together in this way and present it in this way, I think you can get it in front of the right people that will hopefully continue pushing and asking, and maybe could start creating some change that's necessary here. So thank you all again for being here.
And Erica, before we get to Will Humble, just sometimes a story sticks with you and you can't let it go, and you carry it around for years after you've been doing the digging. Was this one of those stories for you?
It was and still is. Even to this day, we're still learning new details, and as some of that's slightly dated. This originally aired in May, and we'll get into some of the changes when we start our discussion, but there are still questions that I have that aren't answered yet. So no, the reporting's not done yet, so this is definitely going to be a story that sticks with me. And I'm also grateful for those who spoke out throughout this entire reporting process and were brave enough to share their own experiences, because that's something that is valuable when it comes to reporting on stories this way. And I'm forever grateful for the people who wanted to share their stories and trust us to really try and drive for change in these systems here.
Will Humble, who many of you have seen on our air and all of the TV stations across the valley, former director of AZDHS and the current executive director of the Arizona Public Health Association. Will, thanks for being with us tonight, and why don't you tell the folks what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So my background is in public health. I've spent about 35 years, I think, now in public health in different aspects. A lot of that was at the State Health Department, one of the agencies that you heard about, actually in a few places, which this state mental hospital is run out of the Arizona Department of Health Services. State Health Department is also responsible for the licensing programs and was responsible for ensuring that Tilda Manor was adhering to their expectations under their license, and we can talk about one of the things that really irritated me that Colby said up there. But the state health department is, that you asked, who's responsible ultimately for the safety? And it's the state of Arizona. It's the state health department who's the regulatory authority. And the fact that Colby would just say it's the facility itself, of course they have that obligation. I'm getting off on a tangent here.
No, but passing the buck in this case.
Yeah, it really irritated me. So I worked with Erica in the background throughout a lot of this because I worked at that agency for so long, and she would come to be frustrated that no one would talk to her, or they're not returning their calls, or she can't talk to the right people. You can talk to the person who's the communication director. By the way, as you students, always try to get to the person that does the work. Try to get past the communication director, because that's where the real stories, that's where the real story is with the people who actually do, not the people who are paid to tell you what the director wants you to hear. But so Eric, I was kind of a sounding board on the licensing pieces of this, the state mental hospital, the Arizona State Hospital pieces of this, the aspects of what does guilty except insane really mean in state law. You already knew about PSRB. So that was kind of my role, as sort of in the background. I think you interviewed me a couple times, mostly just on background. It was all on the record, but it's just, So anyway, that was how I helped with this.
I would encourage anyone who has a question to start lining up. We have a microphone. Are we going to keep it in the back? Okay, we're going to bring up the microphone. If you have questions, I would encourage you to start lining up so that we can move on with our program here. I also want to introduce Dr. Felicitas Koster, who's a psychiatrist at Valleywise Health. Thank you, Dr. Koster. Would you like to just tell everybody about what you do?
Sure, hi. So I am a psychiatrist at Valleywise Health, and I work at the Mesa Behavioral Health Specialty Clinic, which treats persons determined severely mentally ill.
One of the things that we heard in that story, Dr. Koster, roughly 2,400 psychiatric beds in the state. From where you sit, is that sufficient for a state the size of Arizona?
It appears not. Especially for Valleywise Health, we're the only hospital here in Maricopa County that sees patients who are on a court-ordered evaluation. And there's always a long waiting list to get people into our hospital, which is very detrimental to our community because oftentimes these petitions, they expire. And by the time they expire, they're then oftentimes released from the crisis care center where they were at.
And a patient deemed to be seriously mentally ill, should they ever be sent to a group home? Was that a mistake in your mind?
No, that is not that depends on the patient. I cannot comment on this specific case because I have no first-hand knowledge about it. But in general, people who have been determined severely mentally ill, they may be best served in a group home.
As opposed to a hospital?
Yes.
Setting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's get to your questions, and thank you. And please introduce yourself and then direct your question to whoever you have it for.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Christy. I'm a senior here studying journalism. That's my major. I have a question that I don't know who would be best to answer the question. I think it's kind of a court-related question. It seems like this story sticks to you in a way that a past story anyway has stuck to me, that I did for actually a 301 class. And it's about a guy who went through something really unfortunately similar, actually. So I don't know if you've heard of the case Fabian Durazzo, but he's currently going through the court system for murdering a pregnant woman after he committed some other nasty crimes, but he was deemed mentally unstable and had schizophrenia and things like that. So how likely is it that we're going to see him convicted and go through court and things like that based off of what you've seen with this case? Is he going to receive the help he needs?
I'll start Well, I'll just start by saying that having reviewed a lot of cases similar to this one as well, or as similar as something can be, I think everything is situational. And when it comes to getting help, I think the people who are providing the help need to be able to respond to every sort of situation. And as we've seen in this story, and it sounds like the details in the case that you're looking at, that the details can be very varied and the outcomes could be really troubling if there isn't the right sort of help applied. And I would be very interested to hear from Dr. Koster as to what she may think in terms of that sort of scenario.
Well, I'm not familiar with this particular case, and so I guess it depends if, what happens with it. If a person is found guilty except insane here, depending on what that happens now, whether they will be overseen by the PSRB or in the future by a judge. We don't know how that is going to look like yet, how they're going to make the decisions. Also, in regards to the group homes, we're not really sure if anything changes, if the oversight is going to become more stringent or not. So I really can't say too much about that. Sorry.
I'll jump in. I think from the big picture on looking at so much of the journalism that we've been covering in the few years that I've lived here, we have exposed not just a couple of gaps in the mental health care system, but understanding how the courts work a little bit would be pretty valuable. The guilty except insane only has a jurisdiction of maybe a couple hundred of people over its lifetime. Far more people, thousands, will go through a they call it Chapter 11. Basically, they'll be seen, are you able to stand trial? If you're not able to stand trial, you're bounced back basically until you are able, and that's what typically is going to happen to most people who are going to be facing criminal justice. What we've also seen, and something else to really pay attention to, is that once they go to jail, serve whatever it may be, a lot of people are released to the street. We've done many series about people who are it's been called treated and streeted, effectively. So even if you have a diagnosis like Christopher Lambeth or like Stephen Howells, or someone who has committed crimes and someone who has not, just because, and you could speak to this a little more maybe, just because you go to a place even like Valleywise or to jail, and you need help doesn't mean that you're going to be released into a system that's always going to catch you afterwards. So as far as your case goes, I think you should pay attention to the court system. You should start finding contacts who can help you follow it better and continue reporting on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, in Erica's story, the person that who was that you interviewed from DHS?
Colby Bauer is his name. He no longer works at ADHS. He left.
He pointed out that AZDHS does what it can under Arizona law, a yearly inspection of these group homes. Does Arizona law need to change?
So there's some functions that need to change. So real quickly, so here's how it works, and this is an important part of all this. Back in 2009, well, I don't want to go that far back. Let's just say what he said, what you had up on the screen is accurate. So if you have a licensed facility, it could be assisted living, it could be skilled nursing, it could be behavioral health home like we're talking about here. You can either, you get your license from the Arizona Department of Health Services, and you can either have your annual inspection by the state health department, or you can pay an entity, and that's what you were talking about, accreditation. You could pay, say, the Council on Accreditation or another entity to certify that home. And then under state law, the state health department's required to accept that certification in lieu of the annual inspection. So that's how it works. But the state health department is obligated by law and by statute to follow up on complaints that come in about the care in the homes. And so you asked if the state law needs to change. I would argue that number one, the resources at the state health department need to change so that they can actually follow up on the complaint investigations that come in. I set the licensing fee in 2009. It hasn't been changed since. So it's an under-resourced agency, and it's not just, and you could see it reflected in the fact that, at this group home, it was for year after year, there was no deficiencies noted or the complaints were dismissed, and then there's the murder that occurs, and suddenly There's a whole laundry list of deficiencies. Now, you're telling me that it just happened overnight? I'm saying that there was a lack of due diligence on the part of the agency for years that led to that situation, a lack of regulatory rigor and lack of following up on complaint investigations. And for Colby to get up there, and I know him really well, I worked with him many years, for you to ask him who's responsible, and for him to say it's the facility alone ultimately, I mean, that's just a lack of accountability and something that should not happen in state government. I used to say to my staff all the time, when bad stuff happens, you take the ropes. You learn from it, you accept responsibility for it, and you make changes. And it just irritates me to see people not doing that. So anyway.
Dr. Koster, some people say, in fact, I've heard it many times, that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis in America. From where you sit, do you agree with that?
It is a crisis. I think it is in general healthcare and especially mental health care. There is a lot of people with need, and the resources sometimes aren't there. And when you don't have enough resources, you know, people make mistakes. Things don't go well sometimes. So I think more resources would always be a good thing to just help support our community.
And when you say resources, do you mean money? Do you mean staffing? All of the above?
Well, always money and also people, yes. That is what I believe.
Someone said in Erica's story, the measure of a highly functioning society is how they treat their ill, the people who are sick, whether it's physical illness or mental illness. Will, is this an indictment on our society?
Well, I don't know, that is a pretty big, bold statement to make, but I do think that, you know, as a society, we could and should do better.
Okay. Will?
I don't think it's an indictment on our society. I think it's an indictment on the people that were responsible for ensuring the health and safety, speaking to Tilda Manor, of the residents in those homes. And it's not just behavioral health group homes. I mean, there's the Auditor General. By the way, all you journalists, future journalists, remember the Auditor General's office if you stay in Arizona, because it's a really group of super talented people that put out reports. They report to the state legislature rather than the executive branch, which is really important because it's a really key check and balance in the system so that the legislature has a direct view into what is happening within the executive branch. And they put together some really professional reports. And over and over and over again over the last several years, the Auditor General's report has put out reports that said the state health department is under-resourced. There's a report that talks about their performance inspecting nursing homes over the last several years. Gross underperformance. The legislature had a joint health committee hearing, some of whom were in. Senator Bartow was in that meeting, holding the agency to account. So no, it's not an indictment of our society. It's an indictment of the people who were responsible for these functions within the executive branch. That's my opinion.
All right, let's get to our next question.
Hi, my name is Deborah Giesling, and I am the mother of somebody who lives with serious mental illness, and I know this system well. We've been part of it for 12 years. My son currently lives in a group home in Gilbert, so I just want to echo what Will said. Colby Bauer's comments, they didn't irritate me, they infuriated me for him to not accept responsibility. It's very chilling when I have a son living in the system. So I've also been advocating. It thrust me into advocacy and becoming more public. My main motivation was to save my son, and that's how I did it, by being public. So I know it pretty well, sadly. Just a couple quick questions on the AZDHS report. They went to the home, Tilda Manor, and some things I noticed were interesting. They said 6 out of 9 residents were danger to self, danger to others. And they considered that to be a violation, which I found interesting because many of the residents are on court order that go into these group homes, and it seems like this was a BRF, a behavioral health residential facility, which is a higher level than just a community living group home where my son currently is. So most of these residents are danger to self, danger to other. They've been declared that by the court. And so they're having to live in the community, and most of the time they step down from a hospital into these BRFs. So I'm curious as to why that was a violation, if that came up or there was some clarification on that.
What we had read the report to mean, and again, as Will had stated, it was not easy to sit down and talk with someone from the State Health Department, and even when we did, they did not want to talk specifics about the Tilda Manor case, even though that was the reason we needed to talk to them about what had happened, because obviously when someone is killed in a group home, that's a failure. That's not supposed to happen. It's a place where people are supposed to be kept safe. And I think when we were reading through the report, to our best understanding, Tilda Manor, based on its own specific guidelines, that was something that was supposed to be considered before admitting someone to the home. I don't think it was necessarily something that would prohibit someone to be allowed in the home, but it was something that they should have considered and didn't. So I think it was a violation due to a flaw in maybe the screening process. And what we also uncovered as we reported and talked to people who, stay in these facilities and other family members like yourself who know a loved one who's in a facility, they had said that there is not knowledge of background of other people who are in there. The people who, may be placed in the home, that's not really checked against anyone else who is also in the home. So I think that is a gap in care that maybe certain backgrounds will not do well together, or it could create a problem or a scenario and result in a really deadly outcome like we saw here. So I think that's what I would say, how I would address that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. What we were told and what we understand is that every group home has to meet its own set of criteria. And Will, you might be able to help explain this a little bit better, but basically the licensing guidelines don't say exactly what each individual facility is supposed to be capable of doing. The facilities are supposed to tell the state, we're capable of this, and then they're supposed to stick to their own rules. And what this said is that you're not capable of handling this many people with these issues, and you took them anyway, which is a violation of your own rules, thus a violation of state law.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We rewrote all the regulations in 2013. It took us a year and a half, and we wrote it that way because the regulations used to be very black and white, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we made them basically, if you go back to the base level, the regulations require the facility to meet the needs of the patients. That's the bottom line. You got to meet the needs of the patients. And so the placement is really, the blend of people that are placed at a facility is an important component of ensuring that in the end you're going to be able to meet the needs of the patient. And so it's not that you can't have 6 or, dangerous self and others. You got to meet the needs of the patient. And if you have too many people that are high needs in a facility, you're unlikely to be able to meet the needs of all the patients because your patient load is too complex. So I think that deficiency really just tied back probably to not being able to meet the needs of the patient. But I don't want anyone to forget that previous years kept showing no deficiencies. Mm-hmm. And then it's on the news and suddenly it's 15 pages long. Well, that shows you that there was a lack of rigor on an annual basis going back for a long time. And it's a resource issue in part, but it's not something that needs a general fund appropriation. The state agency director has the authority to set licensing fees. That's already in law. So Director Christ and current Director Harrington could go, open up a rulemaking, adjust the fees to bring in the resources to run the program. This program is run by the licensing fees that people pay for the privilege of running facilities. And so this isn't a problem that it's fair for an executive branch agency person to blame on the legislature for the lack of funding. They have the authority to raise the fees. Director Christ she had that authority and didn't didn't do it. Don's not doing it now, despite the Auditor General reports. So one of the things that bothers me the most in state government has always been people who are unwilling to take responsibility and be accountable for their programming and what you're responsible for under law. The only way you get better is by accepting responsibility when something goes wrong, learn from it, and move on. And learn from your processes and improve them. So when you see people not, as you said, not taking responsibility for things, it shows that they don't have a culture of improving performance. It's obfuscation and blaming other people. And you don't get better when you do that.
CYA.
In life or professionally or anywhere.
CYA.
Yeah, and you don't, personally or professionally, it never works.
Right.
Learn from your mistakes. Own them.
Well, could I ask one more follow-up question? I'll sit down for just along these lines. I understand that the BRFs, which are where this happened, the behavioral health residential facility, they receive funding from the REBA, Mercy Care. The community living group homes, where my son is, receives funding from Access. Were those two organizations contacted through this, and why are we not holding them accountable as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We reached out to Access numerous times, but to no effect. And Mercy Care has always referred us back to Access. So Mercy Care has actually never done an interview with 12 News as long as I've worked at 12 News, which is since 2019, and despite numerous attempts to contact them, and they're actually pretty difficult to contact at all. Access has a spokesperson who may or may not respond to emails. Do you have anything else?
I would say they respond to emails, but they tell you that due to patient confidentiality, they cannot talk about anything, which is fair. And I think there should be patient confidentiality laws, don't get me wrong, but it is frustrating when you're trying to get to the root of a problem, and when that is an agency that's involved and you get absolutely nothing, and there's no documentation that you can really dig into to, hold these agencies to account, then that's frustrating. And I will say, though, we had heard anecdotally, and it's been, to this day, a pain to get any documentation from Tilda Manor. We do know people were there through Access, and one of our updates that we didn't get to mention right off the bat is that this particular facility did officially lose its license in June 2022, so there's no one staying in those homes at this time. Just today we learned that 2 of the other facilities failed to pay their licensing fees, so they lost 2 of their licenses, and we had reported in our piece that another one had lost one too. So of the 5 Tilda Manor locations, only one of them is in good standing with the health department right now and can theoretically operate, although we've been told anecdotally that there are no people living in those homes. So I think that's a great question, Deborah, and at this point, no, it's been hard to really figure out exactly what role they may have had in this, and it's been tough to try to hold them to account as well.
They are named in Stephen Howell's family's lawsuit.
Hi, what's your question?
Hi, my name is Layla Roden. I'm a journalism major, and I had a question because I'm interested in the crime kind of investigation reporting. I just wanted to know if is your job hard when you have to actually go and talk to these people that are dealing with a death? Is it, how do you feel and how do you overcome that? Because you have to do that a lot. So I would assume that it would be kind of traumatic, because I don't know how people react when you guys come up to them and ask them questions.
Well, in this story, as you saw, I'll start off with this, Katie, you can definitely weigh in. But we talked to a lot of people, and it was not just, officials or people who are working in these facilities. It was people who lost a loved one or people who are dealing with something challenging in the mental health care system. And I think the best way to approach that is with compassion and kind of an open door to say, hey, we know the situation and the circumstances are hard, but, sorry, the mic went out, but I'll talk very loudly. So it's, tough circumstances, but I think, I always phrase it, and when I reach out to people, I say, hey, if they're, I understand this is a tough situation, but if there's, a way our reporting your story could maybe prompt change or maybe help, then we'd love to figure out the best way to do that and sit down and talk with you. A lot of these conversations happened over the phone first. Katie and I talked a lot before we approached certain people, knowing that there is that barrier and that challenge that comes with some of the really sensitive material in this case. So I would say always remember that you are dealing with people. No one ever has to talk to you. I think public officials and people who are in positions of authority should talk to you when there are situations like that, just coming from my vantage point here. But someone, you know, a family member, or Nicole, who is the ex-wife of Stephen Howells, and, you know, when you think ex-wife, you might not think, oh, they'll speak to us, but she ended up being an incredible interview and gave us so much more insight on Stephen, who he was, and that we knew that was an incredible part of the story that we really needed to have. So I guess I know I'm getting rambling on a little bit here, but I would say you just have to be very open-minded and also compassionate when you're approaching people in this scenario. And if it's something that's really heavy, then talk it through with your team as well.
Okay, thank you. Did you? No. Okay.
Thank you for your question. Dr. Koster, professionally speaking, how do you know when it's appropriate to give someone a second chance, like Christopher Lambeth? He had killed his grandparents, and then he was sent to a group home in less than 10 years, released from the state hospital. How do you know when it's appropriate?
I'm not sure what you mean by second chance. I mean, ultimately now, you know, it is in the hands of the courts.
But from a psychiatric standpoint, are there markers, are there indicators that make you feel comfortable releasing someone and then putting them into a group home situation?
I see what you're getting at. So, in general, people who've had committed violence or have thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves or others, they often have these thoughts chronically. And so, yes, they are definitely fine to put in a group home. Of course, we always talk about treatment plans, so that's what the key is. You need to have a treatment plan in place. They need to be most likely on medications, monitored regularly, and have a whole treatment team that checks in on that person regularly and intervenes appropriately when things don't look good. So you don't wait until something bad happens, but there are always a lot of signs beforehand when somebody's not doing well. And then you know, you go back to the treatment plan and adjust it if needed be, and intervene as needed, whether that is changing the medications, restarting the medications, making sure they take their medications, whether that is maybe putting them temporarily in a hospital for aggressive treatment, or placing them on court-ordered treatment, maybe switching them from a regular outpatient clinic to an ACT team. So I think it is really dependent on the treatment plan that is in place for them, and that it is sufficient and that it is specific to that particular patient.
I have a quick follow-up on that. I agree with everything she just said, and that is this. The oversight for the patients we're talking about is with the Psychiatric Security Review Board, PSRB. And it was in your story, and it went by really quick, but I don't want anyone to lose this part of it, which is that oversight committee, PSRB, hasn't had a quorum, hasn't been able to meet, hasn't had done the oversight. They can't have meetings in February, March, April, May, June,
July, August.
August. They still, so they're, and these are people who are appointed by the governor's boards of commission, makes recommendations to the governor, who then appoints these positions. And because there's a lack of quorum this whole year, this oversight function hasn't been happening because people haven't been appointed to the board. I mean, if that's not nonfeasance, I don't know what is.
Well, how does that happen?
We've asked, and the last we heard from the governor's office, which was a few months ago, I've reached out recently to talk about the recent cancellations of meetings, and we've just heard, you know, they're actively trying. And it has not happened, and you have to think too, you know, I know this meeting hasn't happened, but there are families of victims who go to those meetings, and there are people in the state hospital that have not had that sort of checkup, and that's a really long time to go without that sort of follow-up, especially given the population that the board is tasked with overseeing for the time being.
And it's not just the people in community placements already. It's people at the Arizona State Hospital who rely on the PSRB to help provide them the due process with their treatment plans. And now that doesn't exist. And it hasn't existed all year, and it's inexcusable, in my opinion, to not appoint. There's talented people that would serve on that. In fact, I know there are people who have applied. I know for a fact there's talented, qualified people that have applied to serve on that board, and it is serving. It's not something that you make a lot of money on. It's grunt work, and it practically pays nothing, but there are people who want to serve and do that, and that's been vacant the entire year. Thankfully, in my opinion, the responsibility is moving to the courts. That has moved up to January 1st, right? It was in a budget reconciliation. Your story said July.
This aired in May originally.
Yeah,
so
and the bill,
we're
the
updating.
state budget passed and moved that up, thankfully, to the new year, January 1st. So the courts will be overseeing this soon. But in the meantime, this has been a vacant. This has been a part of state government that's super critical, that directly relates to the story we talked about today, that has been, in my view, intentionally kept vacant. I can't think of another reason why
what would be the
these appointments
motivation
haven't been made.
What would be the motivation for intentionally keeping it vacant?
You'd have to ask the governor. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and I
go ahead.
would just add to that too is that, I think this is a welcome change for some people, but I would be curious to know from a journalistic standpoint, how can we ensure that the courts will do a better job than this board? What will be, what sort of judges will be involved? How will they be trained? Is there going to be a certain set of criteria that they will follow? And that would be something I would be interested in seeing
And the PSRB meetings, at least, were public record. And I don't know how many of these hearings would be public record, and if cases are sealed, and if different hearings are sealed, it can be really frustrating. There's a lot of changes that we really want to see some transparency in, and I think we're gonna have a new governor. We will have an election in November, and it's something that we have to continue not only to ask our current governor, but also candidates who may become the governor if they will be committed to transparency and enforcing public records laws. I think also to what Dr. Koster said, we talked about the treatment plan a little bit, and I think when we know that there's someone who needs the treatment plans that doctors are laying out for them, and then we later hear that they weren't enforcing it and didn't look at it for months, according to the state review, I guess how does that make you react? Because I know how it makes me feel.
Well, in our clinic at Valleywise, we always talk about treatment plans. We always review them, and we make changes depending on what the patient does. So I cannot really speak to, like I said, this case, I wasn't involved in it, but we take treatment plans very seriously. And so, we monitor our patients and we make changes all the time. A, because they're doing better, or B, because they're doing worse. And so you have to, the clinic also, that is our job to make sure that our patients are, well treated so that they can be in the community and do what they want to do. That's our goal, so that they can live their life. But we also need to make sure that everybody else is safe, and, the community, and including our patients. And so if you don't have a treatment plan, then you don't know, what are you going to do, what's going to change, how will you know when to make changes?
And those licensed facilities are required under the regulations to make sure that the patients under their care are following their treatment plans. So it's follow through on those plans. And that if you don't have that regulatory oversight, and people know they can get away with it and not have that oversight and not hire the kind of talented people you need to run these kinds of facilities, then they're going to take shortcuts. And you have results like we just have been looking at here.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to our next audience question.
Oh, it does adjust. Okay. Hi, I'm Melena Bizier, and this is for, I guess, anyone who wants to answer, but I believe, Ms. Wilcox, you went to ASU, right?
I'm not that Kate.
Different
yes.
Kate, okay.
Yes, she is actually in the back of the room.
Okay, so for
I went to
anybody.
the University of Iowa. Yeah.
But when you started getting into the field and getting into doing documentaries and stuff like that, first of all, how did you get into that? And because that's exactly what I want to do. And then also, when you're looking at stories and you're looking through different types of things that, how do you find what might have a bigger story to it? When you're looking at, dozens and dozens of different news reports and things like that, how do you look at something and say, there probably is a bigger story here? And what is it that you use to kind of feed through those things?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that for this one. So in this case, we got a call through the scanner, and our desk heard there's been another shooting. And unfortunately, in Phoenix, there's a lot of shootings, and we can't cover all of them. But they looked it up, and they're like, yeah, that one seems like it might be a group home. And no other stations went there that night, and we had an exclusive report the first night. And immediately, it became apparent to me that it met a certain number of criteria. That it needed to be continued on because for me, whenever there's a systemic issue that could have impact on many people, we have a responsibility to report on those things. For example, last week there was a shooting at a group home where a teenager killed another teenager, and we have stayed on that relentlessly since last Thursday, finding 176 calls to service at this one. The DCS, this is the Department of Child Safety foster care home, had 1,000 calls for service to one location since 2017. It actually makes me nauseous to think about it because multiple kids have died there and they have not been shut down. It's a different department, not DHS, it's DCS, but you look at things like that, you start to see trends and you have to stay on them. I would say Erica took over this story. She wasn't the first night reporter, right? You were day 2 reporter?
Yeah, I came on the next day.
Okay, and that continued to have that curiosity. And you would bring me something, and I hope that I pretty much said, yes, do that then.
Yeah, and I will say that I mentioned this in the beginning, but as it became apparent to me as we continued reporting, like there was, I think that first day I started going through court records, and I was like, we need to do a lot more with this. This is, we typically, our initial news stories are, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and as we continued to gather data and talk to people and realize just how big of an impact this story had, I think we really started to want to do more with this and put it in a way where it can be presented long form. So we started with the podcast first, and then we evolved into this documentary piece. So I think the main thing to know if you have a bigger story on your hands is to keep looking. And if there's nothing there, then you have to move on to the next one. But if you keep finding that under every stone you turn, there's something else that needs to be looked into, then I would say keep going with it. That's when you have a bigger story. And if you can tie it together and put it in a chronological way like this, then...
And you don't have to approach a story as it's going to be a documentary. You need to approach a story as this is a news story, a matter of public interest that needs to be told today. And after you've done dozens and dozens, now you look back at everything you've done and say, okay, now I can make that into a documentary.
So do you, when you're doing those news stories, do you kind of look at one at a time and say okay, I'm doing this and I think there's more, and then go into that? Or do you do a lot and then kind of look back at them? Both. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to point out to our state representatives, thank you for being here tonight. If any of you have a comment or a question, I will bring a mic over to you. Just raise your hand. I don't want to put you on the spot and make you come up here, but if you have anything you'd like to point out or talk about or ask, please raise your hand and I'll bring a mic to you. Dr. Koster, one of the things that strikes me is the complexity of mental illness. It's not and we saw so much of Will during the pandemic. But there isn't a vaccine for mental illness. We can treat it with drugs, but a lot of times it's a guessing game, and what works for a year may stop magically working after a year, and you may have to change the patient's medication. And then you add in how stigmatized mental illness is in our country. And that's a shame, and that's why I have so much admiration for the mom who came up here and had the question earlier about bringing this into the light, because we need to be talking about this. We need to be talking about the mental health crisis in America. Can you address the difficulty of treating the seriously mentally ill patient and what a challenging job that is?
Yeah, so that is very difficult, and the way that we approach it's a team approach. We have multiple disciplines in our clinic, and so we don't just treat medications, I always advocate for therapy. We have peer support specialists in our clinic as well. We also have a rehabilitation specialist who addresses educational needs, vocational needs, and interests. and we like to work with families, if patients have families, friends are involved in their care, so to make it really wraparound sort of care. Our goal is to get them back to doing what it is that they want to do in their life, and that their mental illness is not keeping them from living their life. And it's very important that we work together as a team. And it is sometimes difficult, but I believe that together it really makes a big difference. And I feel that for our clinic that a lot of patients are doing very well. And sometimes there are hurdles, and there are a lot of factors, background trauma, substances use is also a big one that often hinders psychiatric treatment. So you have to do dual approach there, treat the mental illness as well as the substance abuse. But we're continuously trying to improve our care and make it as comprehensive as possible.
And so many times these patients, and Erica and Katie touched on it in the series, so many times our prison system becomes the keeper for these people who truly need medical help, and not necessarily to wind up in jail, but it is a vicious cycle, Will, don't you think?
Well, I mean, absolutely, and you could do a whole series on the Department of Corrections like this, with where it's super complicated. Yeah, this is it's a big issue, and you're right. I think the biggest provider of mental health services in the entire state is the Department of Corrections, yeah, absolutely. It's and I just want to throw this one thing in here about the importance of having state agencies be very good at regulating. And that, I mean, when you're talking about Department of Corrections, the Department of Corrections doesn't provide the mental health and other health services for the patients. They contract that service out. And so the super critical thing is to have talented people at these agencies who understand that responsibility and understand the nuances of being a good regulator, holding your contractors accountable. In this case, the contractors would be, in some parts of this is the Access, the state Medicaid agency. They contract with entities, Mercy Care is one, United and others, and they are responsible for providing the services, and the oversight role is for Access to be holding their contractors accountable. And that's the real key here. And I think if Access does a reasonably good job of that. Of all the state agencies, I think over the last 7.5 years, Access has probably been one of the highest performing. Department of Corrections obviously has not been meeting the mark. And there's a lot of untold stories about the lack of treatment of mental health in that system, I'm sure. And Jimmy Jenkins, who's at the Republic now, is really following those stories pretty closely.
I'll add too, just quickly, that I think it's a group of people, a lot of people, as Dr. Olsen said in our piece, it's a continuous cycle, and a lot of people who maybe have a criminal record or background who do have a serious mental illness, that might put them in a place where it puts them on the streets, as Katie said. We've done other reports on that, and I think when there are several agencies involved in mental health care, that they all have to be functioning correctly in order for it to work, because you could be getting good treatment in one area and then punted to another and you don't, and that's where a gap is. So I think it has to be, systemically, everything has to be working for this to work well.
Yeah, I just want to say that at our clinic, and I imagine most SMI clinics, we do have a lot of patients who have a criminal background, and so we routinely coordinate care as much as possible with the jail or prison where they're coming from, and once they're released, with their probation officers, with a goal to, of course, keep them out of jail in the future. So we do really try to kind of close the circle once and for all, if you will.
Absolutely, and that's the kind of work that I think we know has to continue happening. What I will say, and I think Dr. Olsen actually said it really well in the piece, it can be frustrating, I'm sure, for care providers, obviously for families, and to know that some parts of our mental health care system aren't as effective as others. And I think she spoke really well to the sort of profitability in some cases, which is not what ValleyWise is. But some private providers, maybe won't take these patients. So that limits us as well, knowing that some places are private and some places are these public hospitals, but we have very, very few public hospitals, and private hospitals don't necessarily have an incentive to take really complicated cases, which makes our system so much more challenging.
Yes, go ahead. Hi.
Hi, I'm Blake. I'm a freshman here at Cronkite, and I'll direct this question at Erica. In the short time I've been here, I've learned that the most important aspect of journalism is seeking the truth. And how are you able to stay persistent and not back down in bringing to light these underlying problems of these organizations that have tried to hide them from the public?
Hey, thank you for your question, and thank you guys waiting in line. I know I'm glad to see we have a lot of questions here. I would say you just have to keep asking. You never know when someone might turn around and want to talk to you. I know, for example, the state health department, it took like 5 months, and we had to sit down with them and do a background discussion first, and it took a long time, but we knew that being able to ask them questions and try and hold them accountable and see what their responses were was an important part to this investigation, and ultimately that came through. And I'll add too, another part of this that didn't necessarily make it into this piece, but we were able to, Tilda Manor and its management never wanted to speak with us, and neither did their attorneys at this point in time, but we tried to connect with as many former or current employees there as we could, and we were able, one day, it took 2 days actually, we went through all the police reports that we detailed at the Tilda Manors. I was able to look through, see who called. Typically it was an employee that would call for help, call 911, and then we ultimately went down the list of names. We went to 23 different addresses throughout the East Valley to try and track down people who could give us insight on what it is like to work there. And we knew without that we couldn't go forward without knowing that those situations, and we heard a lot of different stories. Some had positive experiences, others had very negative experiences, but I think it's a matter of due diligence to try and make sure you exhaust every single option you have to get any sort of answer.
We did take a Cronkite intern with us as well, so.
Yeah,
talk to
so
Faith.
Thank you for your question.
I just have one thing to add as a piece of advice too, is when you're dealing with like state and county agencies, one of the keys is really just building relationships with people, like not when you're working on a story. So like get to know actual people that work in those agencies, not when you're working on a story, but get to know them so that you have a relationship with them. And then if you're working on a story and the leadership of the agency is unwilling to give you what you need, you've got somebody that you could go talk to, Go through the back door. They're there. And I have to say, I've gone off my whole career, I've gone off the record a lot of times, and I've never been burned. And so you can ask people, say, look, this is not for attribution, off the record, and you can get a lot of key stuff that you really need from people that work there that aren't supposed to be talking to you. And as long as you respect that relationship, you can get a lot of good information from people. That when you're in an environment where the leadership is stifling your ability, it's not always the case. Hopefully in 140 days it won't be like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Bartow.
Thanks so much. I didn't want to turn my back on anyone. I have a couple of questions. First of all, actually comments, but I want to thank you for this investigative report and how it was presented tonight. It's an issue that truly needed the Band-Aid ripped off and continues to. So I applaud your digging and trying to get those answers. I just want to say a couple of things. I think to Will's point about the lack of transparency and accountability in the state agencies is right on. And your comment about the importance of the Auditor General allowing us to have that viewpoint into what's really going on is just so key. A lot of us in the state legislature have been trying to keep these agencies accountable because we keep hearing the stories. And admitting that there's a problem is the first step to solving it. And so I just applaud the cooperation over the last couple of years in trying to address things while you're having agencies fight you the whole way in not being transparent. Simple things like, where's the money going? We spend $3 billion a year, on the SMI in Arizona, and we don't know where the money is going. The agencies are silent, and so we've had to pass bills, which have not been easy to pass, because you have to get bills signed into law, just to get that information. The second thing I wanted to bring up was there's a reason that our prisons are filled with the mentally ill. And to your first slide, when I walked in late anyway, was how few beds we have, long-term care for people with serious mental illness that are in psychosis and need that longer-term care. For a state, for a county of 4.5 million, we have 55 long-term beds at the Arizona State Hospital. That's horrendous. That's criminal, and that's why they are in jail and prison for long term and doing this recycling of hospitalization, jail, streets. I think we are under-resourced, but I also think it's not that much more we need to spend. We just need to change the way we're doing things and truly care for the mentally ill and not street them, not incarcerate them in order for them to get care, and then continue to put the public at such risk when they commit a horrendous crime, and the public is at risk. It is a shame that this had to happen for this night to happen. And again, I thank you. I thank you, everyone on the panel.
Ms. Bartow, before you put the mic down, I wanted to just ask you, in terms of substantive change, what can and what will be done at the legislative level?
Thank you, Mark. There's a lot being done. This past session, we made huge strides. And I gotta say, I think one of the biggest ones was that transparency piece, finding out where the money's going. Since 2015, when we've had integration of physical and mental health care through Access, those records have all been sealed. We're going to finally start getting that information. But another huge change is we put $25 million into more secure residential group homes so that when people are released by the PSRB or the courts into a step-down situation, they won't be able to walk away. They can stay on their treatment until they are really, truly ready for another step down, if that is necessarily to come. Some people really do need long-term care for years and years. That's why they're at the state hospital for that long. Many don't. Many just need maybe 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years, and then they can step down. But that care is just not available right now, and the payment structure doesn't allow it to be. We have a managed care system for our mental health system, and it's much cheaper for the providers to spend on the less ill. So the most ill go wanting, and they're on somebody else's budget, and that budget's corrections. So those are two examples of what we did this past session, and we did many other things. I think the PSRB move was incredibly important, and I do think it will be it will hold. I think it will be a much better situation for those people coming out of the state hospital and going before the judge, who will be changed. They're the ones that put them there in the first place. The judge court-ordered them to the state hospital or wherever they're getting care. So they're an appropriate entity to make that decision.
I just want to follow up really quick about a super important thing that Senator Bartow has been helping, or we tried to get done this last session, which is that a lot of people don't know this, but the state mental hospital, the Arizona State Hospital, is run by the Arizona Department of Health Services and regulated by the Arizona Department of Health Services. Who thinks it's good to have that setup, that's checks and balances in the system. It's been that way since 1974, and it needs to change, and Senator Bartow has been a champion of, we got really close, it died in, I think, House rules or something like that. We all know why and who did it, I won't say, but that's an important check and balance in the system, because if you can create structural integrity, structures that hold people accountable, you've solved a problem for a long time. And it's these policy changes like that that mean so much, and thank you for, we'll get that done eventually.
Amen, we will.
I'll make this quick because I think those that are paying tuition to ask questions should get in, not us freeloaders. There are a lot of seriously mentally ill people, and only a small number are probably getting really stellar care. But there are some that are really horrendous. I mean, those of you who know about documentaries, you know, a big reform was pushed by big documentaries, right? Wiseman, Titicut Follies, Geraldo Rivera in the 60s when he snuck into Willowbrook and saw horrible conditions. And so we're talking about the group homes, even the prison system, but what's happening there is bad and deficient, but it doesn't approach the horror, the squalidness of what's happening about 2 miles from here. You have a homeless encampment that spans about 10 square blocks, right? Maybe 10th Avenue to 15th in the President Streets. I drove through there. It is like Calcutta. I mean, people living under tarps in squalor. If the state ever ran a hospital like that, the administrators wouldn't just lose their jobs, they'd be in prison. Yet you can't clean this up because those people are not so mentally ill, or most of them aren't so mentally ill, that they're a physical threat to themselves or other, which is the criteria for taking somebody into custody against their will for treatment. So my question is, and this, I guess this is for the doctor and for Will, do we need to be a little tough love? Do we need to enforce the camping ban, to lock people up who refuse to get off the streets and not go into to a shelter where we might be able to provide some social and psychiatric referrals and services? Do we clean up these encampments? Because San Francisco's not doing it, New York's not doing it, and we're not doing it, and it's pretty disgraceful.
Well, I think this is a housing issue foremost, and yes, there are people on the streets with mental illness for sure. There are people with substance issues. There are some people who choose to live that way, and then there are people who just had unfortunate life events that brought them there. But the biggest problem right there is that there is no housing for these people to go. And it's difficult to find a job to keep up with your medications if you don't have a place to live. And so I think this is really foremost a housing problem.
But until such time as we build the houses, which is going to take a long time, we can do shelters. The legislature appropriated $10 million in this year's budget for matching funds for cities to build shelters so that these people could go in there with social and psychiatric referrals and services to get them out of that system. Phoenix isn't taking that money, and I don't know why. I suspect it's because they don't want to enforce the camping ban, because they can't lock up these people for public camping if there are no public beds available in the shelters. They don't have enough public beds, which is why the Phoenix police cannot arrest these people, say, get in that shelter or locking you up. They're not taking the cash. I think you have to force a lot of these people in, because I don't think we can wait 10 years until we build, you know, apartments for them. And many of them, like you said, don't want to live in apartments. They actually prefer the streets, or they're so mentally ill they can never function in that type of environment. But I mean, do we need tough love?
I cannot speak to that. I treat people with mental illness who come to us, and a lot of them struggle with housing because there just is no housing for them. In regards to that situation, I don't know, that is like whatever society, I guess, deems is appropriate, but can you force people someplace? I mean, it seems like there is no place for them to go.
I would add to that as well, having recently done an entire series on the homelessness crisis here in Phoenix. And you're right, it's very difficult to track where Phoenix's money has been going. They have millions of dollars in their own budget. They've gotten millions in federal
100 million.
100 million nearly in federal funding from COVID relief, and we've been trying to hold them to account as to where the money is going. And the reality right now is that there is not enough shelter space. The people we've talked to who are in that unsheltered situation, some of them have expressed that it is not easy to get the services that they need, whether it's mental health resources or other resources. And I think a lot of people who might be living on the streets maybe need help in some other area as well. And if you can't find help in all of the areas that you need, then it's going to be incredibly challenging, and people are going to still be stuck in this unsheltered or homeless situation. So I don't want to get too far off the topic here tonight, but I think there are still a lot of questions as to where the money is going, particularly in Phoenix, when there is not just a need for housing, but also mental health services among the unsheltered population.
Mr. Kavanaugh, I think that's a great point, and I think that there is a place where the homelessness crisis and the mental health crisis intersect. And it's probably more than we think.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay, next question.
This is a question to Katie and Erica. Oh wait, sorry, yeah, I'm Miles, I'm a freshman here. So you said that all of the shelters run by, or the group homes run by Manor were shut down. Where do these people go who were in the shelters?
So, and we can talk about this together, but at this point we actually were able to speak with a woman who was living in the same home as Christopher Lambeth the night of the killing, and she said that she was under access and she was removed the very next day and placed in another group home. So she said her experience where she's staying now has been like night and day. It's been much better for her. And the needs that she has, her treatment plan, as Dr. Koster said, it's so important to have, not only have these plans, but to be in a scenario and be in an environment where you can follow these plans in order to be successful. And what we had been told is that after this incident, a lot of the people who were in that particular home were either moved to other places or transferred out. So
yeah, I think, you know, to what Senator Barto said just a bit ago, there's been an investment in more group homes. I think there's so much, like there's a shortage in mental health care beds. There is a shortage in group homes. I think even to what we've just heard, there's people who are turning to homelessness in some cases for a variety of different reasons. But we have overcrowded jails with too few jail workers, with too few sheriff's deputies. We have overcrowded prisons with too few corrections officers. We have overcrowded and problems with group homes and little staffing. So we do have a housing crisis, very much so, in this country. And when you look at what happened to the 9 residents who were there, we don't get to track them all. They all have privacy rights through access, as we just discussed, but the ones who did reach out to us, at least that one woman was placed. Obviously, we know where Christopher Lambeth went, and unfortunately we know what happened to Stephen Howells. So it's tragic, but we know there's basically 2 or 3 things that could have happened. They could have been released to family, they could have been put in another group home, or they could have just fallen through the gaps themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get to our next question.
My name is Luke Hertel. I'm a second year here, and my question is, going off of the point that you made about how going to a different group home made a night and day difference in being able to follow the treatment, I was wondering how much agency the residents have in choosing that treatment and changing it, because I know in the documentary it said that Christopher Lambeth would often say that he wanted to stay in the homes longer. I was wondering how that process was, because it felt like he was getting ignored.
Do either of you know?
Yeah, so in this case, I cannot speak on this case, but in general, when one of my patients is in a group home, we work with the group home together to review treatment plans. And typically, since I still see the patients in the clinic, the team still meets up with our patient in the group home or at the clinic or elsewhere. We can see how they're progressing. And then either party can trigger, hey, let's meet and talk about the treatment plan. So anybody can say that this is not working for me or I need help, and then we would get together and change it. So typically, though, it is probably the treatment team or the group home who notices, hey, so-and-so isn't doing well, let's do a staffing, and the staffing means that we meet with the patient, the group home staff, and the clinic staff, and talk about the treatment plan.
I would just add to that briefly that in the cases we've reviewed, it seems that there was always someone more than just the patient or the person staying at the group home involved in the decision making. And I want to point out too that not all group homes are bad.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot in the community that are doing a good job, and it's a crucial part of this mental health care system. And you know, we've reviewed a lot of the homes in Gilbert with similar backgrounds to Tilda Manor and found that they did not have deficiencies, they did not have issues. So I think it's really important to note that as well, that this is a bad actor, and I think there needs to be ways in order to address the bad actors without, you know, undoing some of the good that these other facilities have been doing as well.
Yeah, I think to Dr. Koster's point and exactly what Erica just said, they're supposed to have agency and they are supposed to be part of their own treatment plans. I think what this documentary showed is all the ways that something went really wrong, but that's not the norm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. And as we wrap up tonight, I would just love to go down our line here and come up with maybe a closing statement on not only your thoughts after seeing this documentary, but your thoughts as a mental health professional about where we are right now in this country when it comes to treating our mentally ill.
Well, I think, you know, obviously we can always do better. In general, I think that here in Arizona, we probably do better than a lot of other states in this country. And unfortunately, you know, the resources are still not sufficient to the need that we have here in Arizona, such as, you know, hospital beds, and you mentioned group homes, and it is true. You know, getting a patient into a group home who is not currently in a hospital can take, you know, 3 to 6 months or longer. By that time, you know, who knows what happens to the patient. Because sometimes, you know, I mean, the reason we want them in a group home is because they need more than just outpatient clinic treatment. So I think having more facilities available, more hospital beds, more group homes would better our community.
Will, would you say that as you look at the next 10 years in Arizona that you're optimistic?
I'll tell you in a couple of months. I'm not really sure. A lot of it depends on, you know, who the next governor is and who that person is able to recruit for some of these key positions, you know, and does that governor actually care? Like I spent my career as the director under Governor Brewer, and this was a laser focus for her. I mean, she really cared about the performance of the system, and in large part, we all owe her a huge gratitude for expanding the Medicaid program, which was not an easy thing to do, which brought a lot more resources, not just to the Medicaid program generally, but to be able to serve persons with serious mental illness. When I first started my job, when our agency, DHS, was responsible for the mental health system, now it's over at the Access Agency, it was in the middle of that terrible recession, and persons were being, if you were what's called a childless adult, you were frozen out of the program and couldn't re-enroll. And had we not expanded Medicaid, this would be a much more dire situation, I think, than we're talking about right here. So I want to close by saying something that I'm glad you talked about, which is that, like, we're talking about a bad thing here, but we've got some structure in place in Arizona, both within the laws and with the agreement that we worked on when I was in that state health director job. It's called the settlement agreement for the Arnold versus Sarn lawsuit, where that case is the jurisdiction on that. That was the longest, I think, case in Arizona history about persons with mental illness. And when we settled that case with the direct involvement of Governor Brewer, we ensured that the courts maintain jurisdiction and can intervene at any time when they see that the system is not performing as accord with that settlement agreement, which tied objective measures called I don't want to get into the details of the SAMHSA fidelity model, that's too much for this, but But there are measurable criteria within the mental health system that are tied to the performance of the system. And we intentionally left the courts so that they could still have jurisdiction and bring the Arnold case back if it turns out that things don't move forward the way I hope they do over the next 4 years.
Erica.
I just want to say thank you again to everyone who came out here today. I think in doing a piece like this, we're really trying to push for change. And I think having people in this room who are able to help or at least address those changes is really beneficial. And I would say what strikes me the most about all of this, or in one way, where I would like to see some changes going forward, is that the staff members who work at the group home, at least Tilda Manor, we heard a lot of different reactions, and some of them sounded pretty horrific, like bad working conditions, saying that they weren't trained to maybe handle some of these really, really severe mental health scenarios that they had to face day in and day out. So I would like to say, or I would like to see a change in, the criteria that's needed for people who are working in these homes to make sure that they're up to speed and up to par to serve the needs. Again, that's, the basis of these houses is to serve the needs of the people who are living in them, who are mandated to live in them. And that's really the area that I think maybe change could possibly start.
Katie?
Yeah, what I want to say is that bad things happen whether or not journalists cover them, but I think when we cover them and expose them and get a conversation going, then change can occur. So we're passionate about doing projects like this, obviously about the homeless crisis as well. I think we spend a lot of time on one thing, doesn't mean that we were able to stop that day or even do another different story tomorrow. I think this job is important, and I'm so grateful to have state lawmakers here as well who are listening to this and possibly making changes. I think it's great to have other community members and young people here because, again, it doesn't matter if I talk about it, it happened whether or not we had done the story. I hope that doing the story makes some difference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. I'd like to thank Dean Batts for having us here, and our GM, Kate Morris, who worked on getting us in here for this. Erica and Katie, thank you for your reporting on such an important topic. Doctor, thank you. Will, thank you. I just want to say, as I look out here and I see all of these young Cronkite journalists, I'm pretty encouraged because we had some very good questions tonight. You were engaged, and we appreciate your participation, even though you were probably prodded because you would get credit for coming tonight. And just from a personal standpoint, there's probably not one person in this room, myself included, who hasn't been personally impacted in one way or another. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's yourself, maybe it's a friend, by mental health and mental illness. And we need to bring it out of the shadows. We need to stop stigmatizing it. We need to start talking about it. And we need to start putting more resources towards fixing a system that isn't taking care of all of the people who need to be taken care of. We're going to continue to do our work at 12, and our legislators sound like they're working on their end, so I'm encouraged by that. And do what you can to destigmatize this, because mental illness is no different than diabetes or anything else. It needs to be talked about. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. And I'm optimistic that with the right people pushing for change, that we can really bring about some substantive change. Thank you for your participation tonight, and thank you for coming out.